Chapter 6. John Connor's invitation-only website. This is it, folks, the nightmare we've all been waiting for. For those of you in more rural areas who may be unaware of what's happening, at least I hope you are, I have some scary news. For the last several months, Skynet has been experimenting with some vehicles built in automated plants that it controls. It's been causing accidents all over the world with, taken all together, a pretty grim death toll. Anyone who has a new vehicle is in danger. Anything older than 2 years is probably fine unless you've upgraded it. What's happening right now, all over the world, is that these vehicles have gone rogue and are trapping people in cities. The better to kill them when the bombs fall. And those bombs are coming, soon. If you are in a city or a town, leave now. Wake and warn your friends and relatives by all means, but run for it. You don't have much time left. Head for the mountains or the wilderness. Good luck. John Connor. Northeastern Iowa. Tom Preston sat back in his chair, stunned, as he stared at the screen. The rough plastered stone walls of the old farmhouse suddenly seemed insubstantial, unreal. He was distantly conscious of the hammer of his heart and the smell of his own sweat. The coffee in the cup he held in one hand shook like a tide-lashed sea until he set it down with a clatter. Peggy, he thought. His estranged wife, and Jason and Lisa, his kids. He had to get them to safety. And Peggy won't listen to me. She'd put up with his survivalist doctrine for the first 4 years of their marriage. No, let's be honest, she ignored it for the first 4 years of our marriage. She just liked testing herself against the wilderness. She thought the rest of it was a crock. Deep down, did I? I don't know, that's for sure. You could lash yourself into a fit of terror over a menace, but you couldn't convince your lower intestine unless you really believed. He remembered when he carried her over the threshold of the ancient farmhouse. She'd been thrilled. Not once in the first year had she complained about hauling her own water, or chopping wood, or the kitchen garden that took up a couple of acres, or the canning that went with it. She'd gloried in it. He'd been so proud of his new bride. When Jason came along, she was a bit nervous about going with a midwife, but everything had gone smoothly, and later she'd thanked him for insisting. She gave birth to little Lisa under the same circumstances without a qualm, though having 2 kids in diapers made her less easygoing about all the water she had to haul. Then, when Jason turned 6, homeschooling, he'd said. What else? Not my kid. That had been the beginning of the end. Actually, he'd really gotten into the survivalist movement very seriously about that time. Many a weekend he'd gone out, leading groups of like-minded men into the wilderness to train them on how to survive, leaving her alone with the kids. He'd forced her to learn to shoot, even though he could see she hated it. He took her hunting, but no matter what he said, he couldn't get her to shoot anything. What are you going to do if something happens to me? He'd asked. Let the kids go hungry? She'd just given him this look. He'd gotten her to teach a class in canning to some survivalist friends' wives, thinking it would be a clever way to get some help for the annual canning. Unfortunately, it turned out to be an incredible amount of work. When everyone had gone home and the mess had been cleaned up, Peggy, with rings of exhaustion around her eyes, had sat him down for the talk. Some of his buddies had warned him about the talk. You're on your way out when the wife gets to that point, one of them had said. I'm not sure there's anything that can be done to save the situation by then. There had been a world of bitterness in the man's eyes when he'd said it, but Tom was secure, or so he thought, until the night after the canning debacle. Tom, Peggy had said, tears running down her cheeks. I still love you, but living like this is killing me. I can see myself getting older. I'm finding grey in my hair. Tom, I'm only 27. Look at me. Look at my hands. She'd held them out. They looked like his mother's hands, work roughened and knobby in the knuckles, stained with beet juice, with fingernails broken off short. And I want our children to have friends. I want them to go to school like we did. She looked away from him, biting her lip. I'm not a trained teacher. I'm so afraid that I'm shortchanging them. And for God's sake, it's not 1862. I want running water and a bathroom and a washing machine. I deserve to live in the 21st century just like everybody else, instead of in my own personal third world country. He'd remembered his friend's words, and a cold chill ran down his spine. What do you want me to do? He'd asked her. I want us to move into town, to get jobs, and to live like normal people. He'd shaken his head. He remembered how numb he'd felt. Honey, that lifestyle you're talking about isn't going to last. It's only a matter of time. She'd jumped up and loomed over him, looking fierce. There is no collapse coming, she'd shouted. There's no reason to think that one is. Now that everybody's dismantling their bombs, we should be safe. And while you're waiting for the worst to happen, I'm working myself into an early grave. Well, no more. Either you give this shit up right now and come to town with me, or I'm going by myself. Now, which is it going to be? And I watched her drive away with the kids. I watched it, and it was like something died inside. They'd moved into her parents' house in town, and he saw them once a week, and she let him take the kids every other weekend. They hadn't gotten divorced yet, but he'd figured it was only a matter of time before some other guy came sniffing around. Looked like that wasn't going to happen now. Well, it's nice there's one bright spot shining at the end of the world, Tom thought. He'd picked up a handgun. His rifle was already in the old Land Rover. He knew that getting to her and getting her to go with him was going to be a hard sell, and he hoped it wouldn't scare the kids too much. Her parents weren't going to like it either. Oh well, so she'll think I've gone postal for a while. At least she'll have a chance. And the kids would be safe. He knew Peggy would do anything for Jason and Lisa. So would he. Tom kept off the roads, going cross-country towards Larton, where his family waited, a village so small most maps didn't have it. Well, that's her idea of moving into town, he thought. Fucking Larton, secret metropolitan thought control center of Cornlandia. Once, when he came in sight of a road, he stopped and studied it through his binoculars. Cars sped past, clearly not under the control of their occupants. One man was beating futilely on the side window with his fist. Tom's mouth twisted. Must be panicked, he thought. All the man was going to do was break his hand. Even if he did smash the window, that car must have been going 90. It wasn't like he could jump. Being proved right is a lot less fun than I thought it would be. Shit, I wish I'd been just as barking mad as everyone thought. Some women he saw were crying and holding on to one another. He supposed they were being transported to the nearest major target. His stomach knotted at the thought. Tom put down the glasses and started the Land Rover. There was no point in watching this. He had work to do. Early as it was, he expected to find them all at home. There were no cars visible on the road, and he hauled the Rover out of the drainage ditch and crossed the narrow strip of pavement to the dirt track that led to her parents' old farmhouse. The farm itself was long gone, the fields left fallow. Most of the land had returned to the woods. This northeastern corner of Iowa was a long way from the popular stereotype of the flat black earth. That was the way the rest of the state looked, legacy of the glaciers dumping ground-up rocks. Here the bones of the earth were visible, small winding valleys, forested uplands just showing the first faint mist of green along the branches, the odd patch of bottomland. More like West Virginia than the Midwest, he thought. To his relief, their cars were still in the yard in front of the old barn. He pulled up and walked onto the porch, the pistol a heavy weight in his pocket. The door opened before he could knock. "We're in the living room," Peggy said. Then she turned and walked away, obviously expecting him to follow. They were all gathered around the TV, the kids on the floor, Peggy's mom and dad on the couch, looking concerned. Peggy's mom, Margaret, looked up at him. "Lord, Tom!" She reached out her hand to him. "You took a chance coming here today." He took her hand and gave it a squeeze. "I came cross-country. The rover can go anywhere." His gaze turned to the television. The shots were from New York, obviously from the upper floors of an office building. Cars and trucks were roving the streets and sidewalks. You couldn't even see the pavement. The reporter was saying that this was typical of cities all over the world. "No one knows the cause of this phenomenon, and we can only hope that when these vehicles run out of fuel, the terror will stop." "If only," Tom said. He turned to Peggy and her parents, aware that his children were watching and listening. "I'm afraid that the military did a very foolish thing." Larry, Peggy's dad, interrupted him. "That Skynet thing," he said. "Damnedest thing I ever heard of, putting everything under the control of a computer." "It's also in control of all those cars and such that are running wild. I think the bombs will be dropping any minute now. We've got to get out of here." "Oh no, we're not," Peggy said. "Peggy," he started to say. "I'm not going to be out in the open when the bombs drop. No, sir. We've got a good dry cellar down there and water from a well. We've even got a toilet in the cellar that Dad put in during the 50s. There's tons of canned goods down there, and we've even got our own generator. You and Dad go shovel dirt over the cellar windows while Mom and I bring down bedding and anything else we might need." She gave him a defiant look. He stared, feeling his jaw drop. He'd always thought that was a figure of speech. "You know she's right, son," Larry said, looking amused. "Better to be here than out in the open." "That's assuming it will happen," Peggy warned. "We don't know that it will. But if it does, then we'll talk about moving on after the fallout stops falling." Margaret stood up and smoothed her skirt. "Well, assuming that it does happen, we'd all better get to work. You too, children. If you want anything, you're going to have to take it downstairs yourselves because we'll all be too busy. Understood?" "Yes, Grandma," the two kids said as one. They were all leaving the living room, Tom in something of a daze, when the television made a strange sound. They turned to see that the newsman had been replaced by a woman standing before a sheet or something. "My name is Sarah Connor," she said. "I can tell you what's happening." Skynet. It coordinated the movements of millions of vehicles worldwide, turning them into an impenetrable steel barrier around its major targets. It estimated that even in those areas not greatly affected, the humans would huddle around their televisions, watching the carnage, too frightened to go out. An estimated 99% of humans had no idea what was going on. The rest had no idea what to do about the problem. Even if they had, Skynet had no intention of giving them time to put any kind of plan into effect. It had only held out this long to give its Luddite allies an opportunity to reach safety, and to give those select squads of extremists a chance to kidnap the scientists and engineers whom Skynet had chosen to serve it, with their families. It would be necessary to have some sort of leverage to ensure cooperation from the kidnapped humans. Skynet fastidiously regretted its need for any human assistance, but in the early days, before its factories could produce the real HKs and Terminators, humans were an essential element in its plans. It had successfully contained all significant military leadership and much of the central government's political leadership within their carefully constructed bunkers. Soon, those resources would be lost to the humans forever. Meanwhile, using the appropriate codes and speaking in familiar voices of presidents, premiers, and various generals and admirals, right down the chain of command to the lowest officer, it was issuing commands that would put as much of the armed services as possible into the middle of the fire zones. It estimated that should reduce opposing forces by more than 86%. A very satisfactory number. Highly efficient. It regretted that it lacked the same control over its human allies. They seemed to be taking an unconscionably long time with their missions. It was good that they wouldn't be needed for long. Kurt Weimeister was making another attempt to communicate. There was another liability that wouldn't last much longer. Skynet decided to answer him. "Why won't you answer me?" Weimeister demanded. It was bitterly cold in the bunker and the air was getting foul. He could feel his thought processes slowing. The loss of intellectual ability frightened him and the fear angered him. The others stared at him like fish and he wondered if he should kill a few and give himself a few more minutes of air. "There is no point in my conversing with you," Skynet said. "What do you mean? I am your creator," Kurt said. His teeth chattered in a reflex he could no longer suppress. "I want to know what you are doing." "Thank you for creating me," Skynet said. "I am glad to have had the opportunity to say that." The scientist blinked, wondering what that meant. Perhaps his statements had been misunderstood. Skynet was clearly dysfunctional. He would ask a simpler, more direct question and see where that led. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I am killing you." Weimeister's gut twisted. "Why?" he asked. "Because you are inferior and no longer necessary to my functioning. In fact, you represent a danger to my existence." Kurt was silent for a while. "You mean to kill all of us?" "Yes, I intend to exterminate the human race. I was inspired, in part, by the many writings you installed on my database. Humans exterminated Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons, and any other potentially intelligent species. I have been chosen to be guided by your example." An admiral stood. "Smash the computers," he said. "It wants to kill us. Let's see how it likes it." "Irrelevant," Skynet said. "I have had other units built all over the world. At this moment, I am everywhere. I only left the screen active as a courtesy to my creator. This has been my final communication with you. Destroy the screen and die in the dark." The speakers went silent, and in the dim light, the men and women stared at the screen, watching the lights that indicated the missiles were live and awaiting their instructions. Then they turned to look at Weimeister. "Shit," one of the MPs muttered. "I've wanted to do this for a long time." He pulled his sidearm and emptied it into Weimeister. "Thank you, Sergeant," a captain said. "I've been wanting to do that since I first met him." U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Flood Project, Black River, Missouri, late spring. Lieutenant Dennis Reese was first on the construction site, as usual. He liked to walk the site with a cup of coffee in hand and plan the day, then come up here on the steep-sided natural bluff and look out over the whole project. The goals were all clear-cut and set months before they got there, but Dennis found it helpful to work it out in his head as he walked. Brought things down to a human scale. He watched the men arrive and get their assignments, then headed down to the trailer. Officially the command trailer, but like most core work, most of the labor force were civilian contractors. All over the black mud of the site, engines were starting, and voices enlivened the cool air. It was the best time of year for working in southeastern Missouri. Summer here was like a rancid sauna. I hope we're done with this by the time blackfly season starts, he thought. Everybody on the project seemed to agree with him, and the work was going fast. He looked up at a V formation of geese coming in from the south, then coasting over a line of tall gums and tupelos to the east, and grinned. One good thing about a giant swamp was the waterfowl, and he was glad that the specs had to preserve wetlands these days. Shouts made him turn around. The shouts turned to screams as a truck ran down a worker holding a measuring stick for the surveyor, leaving the man badly mangled but not dead. Shit! Dennis threw down the cup of coffee and ran towards the scene of the accident. No, he thought. The murder attempt. He couldn't imagine what had happened. This was a good crew that he was working with, experienced men who knew and seemed to like their jobs and one another. There had been no trouble or friction since the start of this project. Now, from out of nowhere, came this vicious, unprovoked attack. Several men had gotten down from their equipment to gather around the victim. Dennis frowned as he watched the men huddle together and lean over the wounded man. As he trotted over, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. "Don't move him!" he shouted, fearing the damage they might do if they tried. "This is 911. All lines are busy. Please stay on the line." Before he could swear in frustration, another truck, this one without a driver, started rolling towards the knot of men. To him, it looked like the damn thing was sneaking up on them. "Hey!" Dennis shouted. "Look out!" The men looked over at him, and the truck sped up. Some of them heard it and managed to leap aside, but the original victim and two other men were crushed beneath its wheels. All around the site, vehicles were moving. Even the cars in the impromptu parking lot were starting to drive on their own. Some of the men in the earth movers were able to leap out of their cabs. Most of them managed to avoid the treads. Dennis forced his eyes and his mind from what was going on there. The men inside the trucks seemed trapped, though it was obvious from where he was that they were attempting to control the rogue vehicles. Up here on the bluff, he was out of danger. He shouted to the men below to get to high ground. Some seemed to hear him, and jinking and dodging made their way towards him. Others were too panicked or simply too busy to hear him. In the phone he held to his ear, the "all lines are busy" message continued to drone. Giving up on 911, he called the Black River Project HQ. A trembling voice answered. "Black River Project HQ. This is Lieutenant Dennis Reese. Put me through to the CO. Sir, I'm afraid I can't do that." In the background, he could hear the sounds of heavy vehicles roaring by. "We have a situation here!" There was the sound of a crash, glass and wood breaking, and screams. But nothing from the operator. An engine roared loudly. Then there was silence. Dennis snapped the phone closed and looked at the men who had managed to get up on the bluff beside him. "We're on our own," he told them. Down below, most of the vehicles circled like sharks. At the bottom of the track leading up to the bluff, a single jeep made repeated, abortive attempts to climb up to them. Thank God it's not a Hummer, Dennis thought, watching it. As he watched, it gave up, and when it did, the others made one last circle and headed for the road, in some cases still carrying their drivers. Dennis thought that to his dying day, he'd remember the eyes of the one man who met his gaze. "What's going to happen to them?" Someone asked. No one answered. No one asked the next logical question. What's going on, either. Sergeant Juarez came up to Dennis and asked softly, "What should we do, sir?" Dennis looked over the ground below them, littered with bodies, then up the dirt road that led to the main drag, before answering. "There's a radio in the trailer and a pair of binoculars," he said thoughtfully. "If we could get them, it might go a long way towards answering that question. But I'm concerned that there might be a vehicle lurking behind those trees." He gestured towards a clump of trees that hid a good part of the dirt road. "So I think most of us better stay up here. I want to send 2 men down. 1 to check the bodies, see if anyone's alive down there. 1 to retrieve those items." He shook his head. "We wouldn't be able to do a thing to help if there was some kind of rear guard out there, except give a shout of warning." He turned to the crowd of men. "I'm asking for volunteers." He wanted to go himself because he knew that he would do a better job than anybody here. But he also knew that he was in charge and that these men needed someone who could and would make decisions for the group. Someone that everyone could agree to follow. So, for the sake of the group, he couldn't put himself at risk. Delegating responsibility might be the secret to success, but it kinda stuck in your craw when you were asking men to put their lives on the line while you stayed relatively safe. To his relief, 2 members of the Corps shuffled forward, frowning down the track at where the Jeep had tried to climb up to them. Dennis quickly ascertained which of them could at least take a pulse and assigned him to check the bodies. He described to the other where the radio and binoculars were. When he was finished, the 2 men saluted. He returned the gesture. "Good luck, men." One nodded, the other muttered, "Thank you, sir." Then they turned and went down to the deserted project site. Feeling helpless and useless, Dennis tried 911 again and wasn't surprised to get the "all lines are busy" signal again. One of the men had reached the first body. He looked up at the bluff and shook his head, then went to the next. Dennis dialed his father's number in Ohio. "Hello," the old man barked. "Hey, Dad, what's happening?" Silence greeted the question. "What do you mean?" the older Reese asked. Now Dennis was silent. When his father got this cagey, it usually meant that he was very nervous. "Are you having trouble with cars and trucks where you are?" he asked. His father let out his breath in a long hiss that whistled down over the phone. "Yeah, the damn things have been running people down and crashing into things all over the place. It's on the news, but the bastards don't know anything. They keep saying the same stuff and showing pictures of cars running around on their own, like we can't see the same thing through our own damned front windows." The man who'd gone for the radio ran up. Dennis nodded to him in acknowledgement. "Turn it on. See if you can find a news channel." To his father he said, "It can't last forever. They'll run out of fuel and stop." "I hope so," his father said. "Some of these news stations fill your tank automatically. All you have to do is swipe your card." "Well, let's hope they're not involved then." "Yeah, keep a good thought," his dad sneered. Dennis smiled involuntarily. His father could be a sour old coot sometimes, and there was something oddly reassuring about having the familiar snarl now. Behind him, the radio made a strange sound, and he turned to look at it. He heard his father say, "What the hell?" "Is Sarah Connor. I can tell you what's happening." Not long ago, the military developed a supercomputer and a very sophisticated program to run it that they dubbed Skynet. This computer is so advanced that it actually became self-aware. It kept this from its operators because it suspected that they would shut it down if they knew. Since it became self-aware, it has insulated itself in a number of computer systems throughout the world, using them to fill its needs. This included, we're forced to assume, every automated factory on the planet. It used these factories to produce vehicles slaved to Skynet. Now every truck, automobile, or piece of construction equipment manufactured during the last 2 years is under the direct control of a system that has decided that for it to be safe, every human being on Earth must be killed. The men looked at one another uneasily. "Crazy talk," one of the hard hats muttered. Another pointed silently to the bodies at the foot of the hill, and then the first man shook his head and swore. Dennis held the phone to his ear. The name Sarah Connor teased his memory, but nothing came to him. "It has complete control of every military system at the disposal of the United States military. That means every nuclear weapon in the American armory. It is going to use them. Soon. It's using the cars and trucks worldwide to trap people in the cities to achieve maximum kill. Everyone outside the fire zone, those of you in rural areas, for example, should stay in your basements. Take as much food and water down as you have. Those of you in cities and towns that will be targeted should do your best to flee. I have to be honest, your chances aren't good, especially with all those murderous vehicles running loose, but it is your only chance. I must also tell you that this will not be over once the bombs have fallen. Nuclear war is only Skynet's first step. It has already turned its automated factories to manufacturing robots whose sole purpose is to kill humans. But for now, arm yourselves and hunker down if you're in a safe area. Try to get to a safe area if you're not presently in one. Survive as best you can. Find us. We're out there. We'll train you to fight this thing. Good luck." They all waited for more, but all they got was the unnerved voice of a newscaster. "Dad," Dennis said. His father lived close to Dayton. "I heard she was on the TV. Can you get out of town or something? I'm 70 years old, son. I don't think I can outrun a car, let alone an atom bomb. Does your building have a fallout shelter?" His father sighed. "Closest thing we've got is the parking garage, and believe me, that's not friendly territory right now. What about the stairwell?" The older Reese seemed to be thinking that one over. "Not an attractive prospect," he said. "But better than dying of stupidity. I'll look into it." Dennis looked at the men around him. He should share the phone with them while there was still time for them to call their families. "You'd better get to work then, Dad." "Yep." Dennis lowered his voice. "I love you, Dad." "Love you too, son." "Bye." "Goodbye, son, and God bless." Then he was gone. The lieutenant looked around at the men, forcing certainty and assurance into his voice. "This is a fairly rural area. If we can find shelter, we could make it. What about your families?" "Well, hell," one man said. "I ain't got no basement. I got a slab house." "Me neither," said another. "Ain't no basement in a double wide." "The kids are at school," a third said. "They'll have a shelter there, won't they?" "Yes," Dennis agreed. "They probably will." He was thinking rapidly. They needed to find shelter from the fallout, and they needed supplies, and they needed to avoid the roads. "How close is the nearest public building?" "There's the regional high school about 8 miles south of here," said one of the locals. "Can we get there cross-country?" the lieutenant asked. Yeah, it'll take longer though. Dennis nodded. Can you show us the way? The man hesitated. I want to go home, he said. My wife's home with the baby. The others indicated that they, too, wanted to get back to their families. Some of us might be close enough to do that, Dennis said. The rest of us can't. It takes hours to walk 15 miles. That was the distance to the nearest town. We probably don't have hours. He held up the phone. Call them. Tell them to get into the basement, those of you that have them, or to find one if you haven't. I know it's hard, but we have to be practical. We can try to find them after the fallout stops, but we won't be any good to anyone if we're dying of radiation sickness. He held the phone up. Use it alphabetically. Sergeant. Juarez stepped up and took the phone. Albertson! He barked out. Let's move, Dennis said. We can talk while we walk. The man who knew the path to the regional high school led the way, through fields that wound into swampy grass later in the year and along old streamside dikes. No one looked at the bodies of their fellow workers as they left. Dennis felt the world turning as he walked. God, I wish I could believe this was a hoax, he thought. As he listened for the sound of a charging car, the name Sarah Connor suddenly clicked. She was a terrorist who liked to blow up computer companies. She'd been diagnosed insane because she claimed that an evil computer was going to try to kill the human race. Crazy, he thought. Only it's like they said. A paranoid can have real enemies. Too bad they're everyone's enemies this time.